Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here. Don't forget to subscribe, but today we are talking about cybersecurity in space. That's right, we are heading to outer space. And this actually got me thinking about an interview I did this past April with Dr. Klipstein, Dr. Michael Klipstein, and that was entitled Outer Space is the New Wild West. I highly recommend you go listen to that interview or go watch it on YouTube. It is beyond fascinating, and Dr. Klipstein is beyond credentialed for this. Trust me, it was amazing. Did you know Elon Musk can actually and possibly accidentally start a war with China in outer space, and we're obligated to fight it? It's a really interesting interview. So with that, let's talk about some news that came to light recently in the last week in that vein. And Jeff Faust of Space News, which apparently is an actual publication, had some really good write-up on this, because one of the final things that the outgoing Biden administration did was an executive order that directed cybersecurity reviews of ground systems and contract requirements for civil space systems. Think about those private corporations like the SPAAACCCCEEEE of the world that are doing business in outer space or on behalf of the U.S. government in outer space, and I think this is an important one. So the provisions are part of a broader executive order that essentially the White House, the Biden White House, released on January 16. Now remember, that's 4 days before now President Trump's inauguration. So this order basically covers issues ranging from improving sanctions of cyber attackers to the use of artificial intelligence and quote-unquote post-quantum cryptography to improve security. The order also includes provisions regarding cybersecurity of space systems, and the Biden White House stated in a fact sheet about that order, and I quote, "Cybersecurity threats to space systems have risen dramatically, threatening global critical infrastructure and communications. Their disruption can bring global commerce to a halt and seriously impact national security," end quote. And yeah, that's 100% correct. We are starting to see that, and I'll talk about that in a second, but also understand that outfits like NATO, etc., are building backups to the underwater fiber cables. If they're ever cut, they're going to move to satellite. Not as good, but it is a backup. And so satellites and basically outer space communication is beyond important. So one portion of this order calls for a review of ground systems used by civilian government agencies. It basically calls on the National Cyber Director to review those ground systems and provide recommendations to, quote, improve the cyber defenses and oversight, end quote, of said systems. Now, the report is due to the OMB, or the Office of Management and Budget, 120 days after the order went into effect. 90 days after the receipt of that report, OMB, quote unquote, shall take appropriate steps to ensure that those ground systems do comply with relevant cybersecurity requirements. This is according to the executive order. The second space-related provision in this order calls for a review of contracting requirements for civilian government space systems. It requires NASA, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Interior, etc., to review what is known as FAR, or the Federal Acquisition Regulations, in the next 180 days, and then recommend updates to them regarding cybersecurity. And personally, thank you, Jeff Faust, for that primer. I think that these new cybersecurity regulations in space are going to align with the CMMC, or the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, that the U.S. Department of Defense has been bringing to fruition across the entire defense industrial base, which is over 300,000 private contractors working with the U.S. military. This is one of the big things in compliance right now that we are seeing, and there are literally hundreds of thousands of companies out there that are moving towards CMMC certification, and so the government is picking this up as a standard just globally. So the thing is, why am I bringing this up? First things first, space is awesome. It really is. Check out my interview with Dr. Klipstein. I highly recommend it. The guy just has so many credentials. It was such a fascinating interview, one of my favorites. On top of it, here's the other thing. This only came a few days before now President Trump was sworn in. As I'm sitting here talking to you, he was sworn in yesterday. I'm talking to you on the 21st. And so new President Trump, has been on a tear and has rescinded an absolute ton of President Biden's executive orders throughout President Biden's terms. So far, though, President Trump hasn't rescinded the cybersecurity executive orders of Biden. He's done a whole bunch. I actually went and looked through the list of that which was rescinded, and the one I just talked about from January 16th, was not on that list. But the closest thing that we have to President Trump in the last 24 hours or so rescinding an executive order is Executive Order 14110 as it relates to cybersecurity. 14110 basically dated October 30th, 2023. So obviously this was an executive order from President Biden that was rescinded, entitled Safe, Secure, and Trustworthy Development and Use of Artificial Intelligence. In other words, if we're getting rid of safe, secure, and trustworthy development of AI, we getting Terminators? I don't know. But the point is that has been rescinded, which I'm sure Meta and Elon Musk, et cetera, absolutely love. And the rest of us will be shooting at Terminators in 5 years. But the point is that these cybersecurity standards have stood. Meaning President Trump, at least at this time as I'm recording this, in the afternoon of January 21st, this order still stands, which I think is a good thing. And I think one of the things that, whatever the divisions the Republicans and Democrats have, they've been very consistent on cybersecurity and the need for it, which is why it doesn't seem like the CMMC, which really started to come to fruition under the Trump presidency near the end of his first term, and then obviously we have a Biden term where it really got hammered out, and the final rules were submitted at the tail end of the Biden administration, and it's still in process under the new Trump administration, not to mention votes, bipartisan votes on this. Basically, at the end of the Trump administration, there was a bipartisan IoT security bill. I actually interviewed one of the co-sponsors of the member of Congress for my radio show on that. Big fan of that. So these are things that I think could potentially stand. And so as he's on a tear, let's say, to undo things that have been heavy talking points in the election, et cetera, cybersecurity typically flies under the radar, which quite frankly is good for my industry and good for everybody. So the other point, and the final point I really want to make here, is that this is indeed space, the next frontier of hacking. We're already seeing a good chunk of this in the Russia-Ukraine war, where basically both sides have claimed hits on satellites, communication systems in space, et cetera, et cetera. And to be fair, President Trump does have a history of being pro-space in terms of where he wants to go. In his acceptance speech or inaugural speech, whatever you call it, yesterday, he mentioned he wants to plant the flag on Mars, during his term. I mean, unless his term is like 20 years, I don't think that's going to happen. But it moves the ball forward in the same way that President Kennedy said, we're going to go to the moon in that decade. And that decade obviously did not end with a President Kennedy in office for what is now obvious historical reasons. And to be fair, Trump in his first term, then President Trump, once again, President Trump, it's kind of weird to say that, then current and former, but anyway, when he was president from 2017 to 2020, he also did create the Space Force under his first administration. And quite frankly, name aside, because there's a lot of jokes on Space Force, this is actually an important thing, expanding the warfighting capabilities of the United States military into space, when we are seeing basically everybody getting into space now in a way we just didn't see in the last 30 years. So this, quite frankly, I think is a needed thing. We'll see what happens. I'm really hoping that President Trump does not rescind this executive order, because cybersecurity, everything is beyond important, and I don't care. That's not a right or left issue. That's simply a security issue. And so we'll see what happens, but that is your interesting news of the day. And please go check out that interview with Dr. Michael Klipstein. I will link it basically on my YouTube and SoundCloud channels in this video/podcast, and on the radio segment. I'm not sure how I'm going to be able to link it, but go check it out. So there you go. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please attempt to stay private and informed. Take care.